Take a look at this. Off the western tip of Brittany, about 8 kilometers out into the Atlantic, there is a sliver of rock barely rising above the waterline. It is about 2 kilometers long and nowhere more than 800 meters wide. The highest point is 1.5 meters above sea level. No trees, no hills, just flat gray stone, white houses, and ocean in every direction. In June 1940, with German troops closing in on the French coast, the men of this island made a decision that would change the course of the war. Every single one of them got into their fishing boats and left. Its name is Île de Sein, and what happened here is one of the most extraordinary stories of the entire Second World War. So let's get our bearings. Île de Sein sits in the Iroise Sea at the very end of the Finistère Peninsula, the westernmost point of continental France. The nearest mainland is the Pointe du Raz, about 8 kilometers east. Beyond the island to the west, there is nothing until you reach North America. On satellite view, it looks almost impossibly small and flat. A smear of pale stone with a cluster of white buildings in the center and a lighthouse at the northwestern tip. The surrounding waters are marked by the Chaussée de Seine, a vast field of reefs and hidden rocks stretching more than 50 kilometers in every direction, one of the most feared stretches of water in Europe. Hundreds of ships have sunk on these reefs over the centuries. Roman geographer Pomponius Mela wrote about the island in the 1st century AD. It has been known and feared by sailors for 2,000 years. The island has always been its own world. For most of its recorded history, Île de Sein was inhabited by Breton-speaking fishing families who had almost no contact with the French mainland. They spoke their own dialect, followed their own customs, and survived on what the sea gave them. The women of the island were famous throughout Brittany for wearing the highest headdresses of any community on the coast. According to Roman sources and later Celtic legend, the island was once home to a group of 9 druidic priestesses called the Galizinae, said to hold powers over the wind, the sea, and the future. Ancient menhirs still stand on the island today, the last physical traces of whoever was here before written history reached this far west. For centuries, the islanders had a more practical reputation too. Île de Sein was known as a community of wreckers, people who would lure passing ships onto the reefs with false lights, then plunder the cargo. Whether this was entirely true or largely legend is hard to say. What is certain is that the islanders knew these waters with a precision no outsider could match, and that survival here required a ruthlessness that the mainland never fully understood. By the early 20th century, the island had around 1,000 inhabitants. Fishing was the primary occupation. There was a lighthouse, the Grand Ferry, built in 1839, and the famous Armen Lighthouse further out on the reefs, one of the most dangerous lighthouse postings in the world. The men of Île de Sein spent their lives at sea. They knew the English Channel. They knew the Atlantic. They knew England. That knowledge mattered enormously in June 1940. By mid-June 1940, France was collapsing. The German army had swept through Belgium and northern France in 6 weeks. Paris fell on June 14th. The French government was in chaos, signing an armistice that would hand most of the country to German occupation. An obscure French general called Charles de Gaulle had fled to London and, on June 18th, broadcast an appeal on the BBC calling on French people everywhere to continue the fight. Most of France did not hear it. Most who did hear it did not act on it. On Île de Sein, they heard it differently. The lighthouse keeper at Armen picked up de Gaulle's broadcast and word spread quickly across the island. The islanders had already been watching the war approach from their boats. They could see the aerial battles happening above them, and passing ships had brought news of the fall of Rennes and the evacuation of Brest. They understood what German occupation would mean, and they had 5 fishing boats in the harbor. On June 24th, the first boat left, then the second. Between the 24th and the 26th of June 1940, 128 men set sail from Île de Sein for England. The oldest was 54, the youngest was 14. They crossed the English Channel in open fishing boats in wartime with no naval escort. They left behind their wives, their mothers, their children. They left behind the island. What makes this extraordinary is the scale of it relative to the community. Out of a population of around 1,128 able-bodied men represented almost every male on the island between the ages of 14 and 54. The island was not sending some of its men to war. The island was emptying itself. When de Gaulle reviewed the volunteers who had answered his call in early July 1940 at Olympia Hall in London, he moved down the line shaking hands and asking where each man had come from. When he reached the group from Île de Sein and understood that 128 men had come from a single small island, he reportedly stopped and said, "So it seems Île de Sein makes up a quarter of France." At that moment, that was almost literally true. The 128 men from Île de Sein represented roughly a quarter of all the French volunteers who had answered de Gaulle's call, from one island of 1,000 people. Back on the island, the women were left with almost nothing. The Germans arrived in early July 1940 and established a garrison. They planted mines, put up barbed wire, and imposed strict regulations on all movement on and around the island. Anyone who wanted to leave had to leave a family member behind as a guarantee of return. The lighthouse was seized and its optic dismantled. The Germans controlled all fishing activity, meaning the island's main source of food and income was now in German hands. What followed was 4 years of severe malnutrition. The women and children and elderly who remained kept the island functioning without its men. A 1943 census counted 273 inhabitants. The island had lost more than 2/3 of its population in a single week in June 1940, and those who stayed were surviving on what little they could fish under German supervision and whatever food could be brought from the mainland. The monument on the northern tip of the island reads in Breton, Kentoc, Mervel, rather, death. Of the 128 men who left, 22 did not come back. They died fighting with the Free French naval forces across 4 years of war. When liberation came in August 1944, the departing Germans blew up the lighthouse with dynamite on August 4th. They took the stone and the light and left a ruin. 2 years later, in August 1946, de Gaulle came back to the island. He awarded Île de Sein the Croix de la Libération, the highest honor in Free France. Only 5 communes in all of France received it. The island was one of them. He took a stone from the ruins of the destroyed lighthouse with him when he left. In 2024, President Emmanuel Macron returned to the island on June 18th, the anniversary of de Gaulle's original appeal, to commemorate what the islanders had done. Today, about 239 people live on Île de Sein. The fishing industry is largely gone, replaced by summer tourism. The white houses still line the narrow streets. The rebuilt lighthouse stands at the northwestern tip. There is a small museum in the old sailor shelter, dedicated to the island's wartime story. The marine cemetery holds the graves of sailors and resistance fighters. And on the Quai des Français Libres, the Quay of the Free French, a plaque lists the names of the men who left and the dates of their boats. 5 boats, 5 days, 128 men, a quarter of France. The island chose to disappear. 22 of them never came back. If there's a place like this you want me to dig into next, let me know in the comments.